Well, thank you for your patience and your forbearance. The subcommittee will now receive testimony from the first panel before us today. I'd like to introduce them across the board before we get started, and then we'll go to the 5 minutes for each. Dr. Peter W. Singer is a senior fellow and director of the 21st Century Defense Initiative at the Brookings Institution. His work there focuses on the future of war, current U.S. defense needs, and the future of the United States defense system. Dr. Singer has published several books and articles, including most recently, Wired for War, The Robotics Revolution, and Conflict in the 21st Century. And I know it's not exactly getting a recommendation from Oprah, but I've read it in the process of reading it, and it is a good read and well worth doing. He was recently named by Foreign Policy magazine as one of the top 100 global thinkers of 2009. Dr. Singer received a BA from the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University and a PhD from Harvard University. Dr. Edward Barrett is the Director of Research at the United States Naval Academy's Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership and a professor in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law. He joined the Naval Academy in 2006 after returning from active duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. Currently serves in the United States Air Force Reserves. Dr. Barrett holds a BS from the University of Notre Dame and a PhD from the University of Chicago. Mr. Kenneth Anderson is a professor at the Washington College of Law at American University and a research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He's an authority on international human rights, war, armed conflict, and terrorism. Mr. Anderson has previously served on the board of directors of America's Watch, the precursor to Human Rights Watch, and is the founder and former director of the Human Rights Watch Arms Division. He holds a BA from UCLA and a JD from Harvard University. Mr. John Jackson is a professor of unmanned systems at the U.S. Naval War College, where he is currently teaching a self-designed course entitled Case Studies in Technology and Warfare, Unmanned Systems. Mr. Jackson served for 27 years in the United States Navy as a supply and logistics specialist before retiring at the rank of captain. An award-winning author, he has extensively studied history and operational uses of modern aircraft. He holds degrees from Providence College and Salve Regina University, where he is currently a PhD candidate. And Mr. Michael Fagan is the chair of the Unmanned Systems Advocacy Committee for the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. He served for 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, including time as a requirements officer for unmanned aircraft, before retiring as a colonel and chief of staff of the Defense Airborne Reconnaissance Office. He currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer of Logos Technology. He holds a BS from Indiana University and an MS from the University of Southern California. And again, I want to thank all of you other witnesses for making themselves available today and sharing with us their expertise. It's the policy of this committee to swear in the witnesses before they testify. I ask all of you to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. The record will please acknowledge that all of the witness answers in the affirmative. As I think you already know, all of your written testimony will be entered in the record by unanimous consent. We like to allocate 5 minutes, if we can, for people to generalize their testimony so we can get to the question and answer period. The green light will be on when there's 1 minute remaining. The amber light will go on, and when the 5 minutes is up, the red light will go on. At which point, we'd like you to try to wind down if you're not already at that point, so we can move to the other witnesses and then questions. Dr. Singer, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today. It's an honor to be part of this important discussion on an issue that is not only crucial to national security, but often crucially misunderstood. As background, I work at the Brookings Institution, where I lead our research and analysis on 21st century defense issues. Several years ago, I began to be quite interested in the issues of the greater use of robotics in our human wars. And so I set out on a journey to interview the variety of actors in this world, everything from the scientists who are building these machines to the science fiction authors who advise the military to those in the military, everything from the 19-year-old operators who are controlling machines 7,000 miles away, all the way up to the 4-star generals that command them. I was also interested in the politics of this, so interviews with, for example, White House advisors and civilian service secretaries. Finally, the opposite side of the coin. What do insurgents think about this? What do news editors around the Middle East think about all of this? And then finally, the right and wrong and the legal and ethical questions of this. So interviews with military lawyers, but also people at groups like Human Rights Watch. And the book, Wired for War, gathers these stories together, but I think it also illustrates some of the dilemmas and questions that are emerging from this field. And so what I'd like to do today is briefly walk through what I see some of the key issues here. The first is to pull back in this important domain. When the U.S. force invaded Iraq in 2003, we had a handful of unmanned systems in the air. We now have over 7,000. On the ground, the invasion force had 0. We now have over 12,000 in the U.S. military inventory. But we need to remember that while these technologies often look like science fiction, they are only the first generation. They're the equivalent of the Model T Ford or the Wright brothers flyer. And the historic parallels that people make to where we are right now, I think, are quite instructive. Some scientists parallel where we are with unmanned systems to where we were with horseless carriages back in 1909 or 1910. Many in the military, particularly the Air Force, make the comparison to the airplane back in 1918. Others in commerce, for example, Bill Gates of Microsoft has said, we're around where we were with computers back in 1980. Still others make the comparison to the atomic bomb in the late 1940s. The point here is that these are all issues, these are all technologies that had ripple effects on our world and everything from our politics to our laws to our commerce to our ethics. And these were all technologies that created deep questions for us in the area of the creation of law and oversight. And that's why I think it's very important for this committee that they're dealing with it. So what do I see as some of the key questions moving forward? The first is the question of where the unmanned military is headed. We've gone from barely using robotics to using thousands of them in a bureaucratic blink of an eye. But as one U.S. Air Force captain put it to me out in CENTCOM, the problem is, quote, it's not let's think this better, it's only give me more. So the sort of issues that we're wrestling with within this bucket are questions like what are the proper doctrines that we should choose? What are the structures and organizations that we should build around these systems? How do we maintain competition and experimentation in an emerging sector in the defense industrial base? How do we ensure digital systems security so that insurgents in Iraq can't access our information using $30 software that they bought off the internet? How do we better support the men and women who are operating them, who may not be in the physical war zone but are experiencing an entirely new type of combat stress? And finally, what is the division of warrior and civilian in this space? That is, if this area is the future of the force, what does it mean that, for example, 75% of the maintenance of our Predator fleet has been outsourced to private companies, while Army systems operating in Iraq have been described as, quote, government-owned, contractor-operated? The second issue area that we have to wrestle with is, are we engaged in 3 wars? Our unmanned systems have carried out 119 known airstrikes into Pakistan, which is about triple the number we did with manned bombers in the opening round of the Kosovo War. But Congress has not had a debate about it to authorize or disapprove of it. And so the question is, why do we not view it as a war? Is it because these strikes are being carried out by the CIA and not by the military, and thus not following the same lines of authority and authorization? Or is it because of the impact on the public is viewed as costless? And then related to this is the issue of what is the impact on the broader war of ideas, not just how is it being interpreted here in the United States, but how is it being interpreted abroad? The next issue bucket is the question of law. Can our 20th century laws of war keep up with our 21st century technologies? Robotics don't remove the human from decision making, but they do move that human role geographically and chronologically. That is, decisions that determine a machine's action in the here and now may be made by an operator several thousand miles away or by a designer years ago. But the prevailing laws of war are from the 1940s. This also extends to the domestic side. It's not just an issue of accountability, but the question of regulation. It's not just the military that is using these systems, but, for example, the Department of Homeland Security. In turn, we've seen civilian border patrols or vigilante groups operating their own unmanned systems in the air. Criminals have started to use them to scout out targets. So as the FAA debates the opening up of the airspace, we also have broader issues of who can utilize these systems, which is a legal issue.